That day, what I remember the most and why, just to this day, what I will have the most difficult time with, I think, is I had to call my siblings, all three of my siblings, and tell them. I called them one by one, and I remember every word, every sound, everything.
Welcome to The Bright Side of Life, a podcast where people share their personal stories of struggles, pain, and grief, but through all of that, they are still able to find the joys in life. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of The Bright Side of Life. I am your host, Melissa Bright. Today I'm talking with Megan, who is going to share her story of losing her father to suicide. I would like to add before we get started, this podcast may act as a trigger for some people as it covers a topic of sensitive nature. Megan, thank you so much for being here today, and thank you for coming on to share your story. What was your childhood like?
I would say that my childhood was complex. I grew up kind of in Texas, in the Houston area, and I moved to St. Louis when I was about 5. My dad got a new job, and we had family who lived here, so the transition wasn't too difficult for us. But then we weren't there too long when my parents divorced. I was about 5 or 6 when they divorced. And then I remember them just fighting a lot when they were married, fighting a lot when they were divorced. My mom had custody of us for the most part. My dad would get us every other weekend. Mm-hmm. And then there were times when he wouldn't be there to pick us up, but we later found out through multiple sources that wasn't necessarily true. It was kind of my mom making my dad out to be the bad guy. Yeah. But despite all that, going to my dad's on the weekends was definitely by far my favorite childhood memory. He had a 2-bedroom apartment. He built us these amazing bunk beds that I have 3 other siblings, but they would fit all of us. It was a whole weekend just doing dad things. He would pick us up, take us to the grocery store, let us pick out junk food. We would go back to his apartment, order pizza, play video games, watch movies. It was like that all weekend. And then his apartment complex had a pool, so during the summer we got to go swimming, and on top of everything else that I just mentioned.
Would you say that you were closer with your dad or with your mom?
I was definitely a daddy's girl. I don't know why. He just, from the time I was a baby, I was always his little sidekick. Like, we had a lot in common. We both kind of shared the same sensitivities, and we had the same interests. We liked the same music. We were both in cars. We liked the same kind of movies and TV shows. So we had a lot that we were able to bond over.
And whenever you were going on the weekends to your dad's, was it all your siblings that went over there?
Yes, it was my older brother, myself, my younger brother, and my younger sister. My older brother, he ended up getting kicked out at my mom's house when he was 12, and then he went and lived with my dad, but he would be there when we would go visit on the weekends as well.
Through this, did your dad ever start dating anybody, or how long, after your parents divorced, did either of your parents start seeing anybody else? And how was that for you and your siblings also?
So when my parents divorced, neither one of them immediately started dating anybody. My mom eventually got to the point where she started dating again, but it wasn't ever a relationship that lasted too long. We probably honestly do a whole nother podcast episode talking about her. But my dad had dated one other woman before he met my stepmom. He was always really great about not bringing anyone around until he was kind of, old fashioned that way. Until he had been dating them for a while. My mom's a different story, but my dad, really, it was only ever my stepmom that we had met and that he introduced us to.
How old were you when he started dating her, or that you met her?
See, my sister and I are 4 years apart. I believe she was 3, so I was, 7 or 8.
So it would have been a couple years after your parents split up that he had finally met somebody else.
Yes.
What was she like whenever you met her? I guess I'm assuming at this point was only his girlfriend?
Correct.
Okay.
They actually dated for a while before they even got engaged, but I remember the day we met her really well. I remember her being frantic, which I can only imagine, meeting your boyfriend's 4 kids for the first time, and the stress that would cause. But She was very kind at first. We loved her. She had a daughter who was the same age as my younger sister. And we all kind of meshed together pretty well for the most part. We started spending more time at her house and less time at my dad's apartment, and it just added a different feel to the time that we would spend with him, because it wasn't just us and my dad any longer. It was her and her daughter, and then she was divorced as well. My stepmom was. So her daughter would go visit with her dad on the weekends that we were with my mom. Mm-hmm. So we never had time alone with my dad. It was always all of us on the weekends. And he was almost like a different person, not necessarily in a bad way. It just wasn't that spoil the kids and send them home anymore. Right. It wasn't just us and my dad any longer. It was, more of on Saturdays we clean the house now instead of sitting around playing Nintendo 64 all day. And just, it was more like a family life on the weekends instead of us and dad.
Yeah. Did your other siblings feel the same way? Was it kind of like stuff you talked about, like, wow, this is different. I don't know if I like it.
Yeah, definitely. It was, I remember like some weekends she would be out of town, or we would get a little bit of time with just him, and we would talk about that and how it was really nice having time with just dad this weekend.
Yeah. Did he ever mention to you like, I don't even want to say apologize, but like take notice of, I know things are a little bit different now, but that's kind of how things are going to be, or no?
Not to my recollection, no. I don't believe he did.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was, I don't remember bringing it up to him either, but I don't know if it was something he just didn't notice or just didn't notice but didn't acknowledge.
And I know sometimes it's harder for like being the parent and then being the kid. Maybe the parent feels like, well, I don't need to explain myself to my kids, this is our life now, or maybe he didn't know that how much those times meant with just you guys and him,
Yeah, that's safe to say that.
Your dad did end up marrying her. When did he finally marry her? And how old were you?
I want to say it was 1999-ish, around that. I think it was like 10 or 11 when they got married.
Were you happy when they got married, or do you remember what you were feeling?
I was happy. I was fairly close to her. She seemed to make my dad happy, which, that makes me happy. So as I said before, my older brother got kicked out when he was 12 out of my mom's house. So my dad went, picked him up, and he got custody of my brother. So obviously when my dad and my stepmom got married, my brother was living with them as well. So I had always wanted to move in with my dad, but for whatever reason, my mom would never let me. So I would get kicked out of her house multiple times, and he would come pick me up, and I would go over to his house. He'd take me to school the next day, and I would end up having the police come and get me, or she would just come pick me up from school. This is more like a game to her, like knowing how badly I wanted to go live with him because of our relationship and how much like we just got along really well. We didn't get along that well with my mom. But in the state that I live in, you have to be 17 to be able to like choose where I wanted to live without my mom being able to intervene. Yeah. So when I was 17, I had just I just got done with my junior year of high school. The last day of school, I went home, packed up all my stuff, didn't say anything, and my friend drove me out there and I moved in. So despite having to start a brand new school my senior year of high school, it was just 100% worth it to me. Just being able to have my dad around more. Like I said before, I was very close with him, so it was really nice. But my brother, I noticed like my brother and my stepmom, their relationship was a little rocky, not what you would expect. Mm-hmm. And my sister, she's my best friend in the world. We're extremely close. We talk every day. She's a stepmom as well. And I know that stepchildren can sometimes be difficult, and it's hard to have patience for your own children sometimes, much less, I imagine, stepkids. But it was more than that. She just wasn't very kind. And I noticed it more so when my dad would be out of town, that it would come out more. And it ended up getting so bad to where my older brother left and moved out.
Did she ever like physically harm him or anything? Was it?
No, it was verbal. And it was my dad would take her side, because like she was able to say like, this is what happened. And it's a parental figure's word against a child. So it's
right.
And he whether he saw it or not, it wasn't acknowledged. So it's either unacknowledged because he actually didn't see it happening, or he just didn't want to acknowledge that his wife wasn't the kindest to his children.
Right. Or even like, I don't want to argue with her or start a fight. And when you don't take sides of the adult.
Yeah.
Can you explain, I guess, besides, how she treated your brother, how was your stepmom? Was she outgoing? Was she quiet? How would you describe her?
She was very outgoing, very social. She was the one to, like, we went to an event, like, all right, time to go. And then you would always add 30 minutes to that time because she would be talking and, had to say bye to everybody and spend 10 minutes doing that. So, and then she was very confrontational. Like I said, very outgoing, had quite a bit of friends, was really close with her family and her parents. So
yeah, at this point, whenever you started seeing how she was treating your brother and even you guys, what was your view of her at that point? I mean, had things changed at this point yet? Are you still learning that things are not how you thought they were?
I want to say I was still learning. It was me getting bits and pieces of the story and not being fully there for their whole argument or their whole situation. I was just seeing little glimpses of it, and I didn't know enough to say, like, oh, my brother didn't start this, or why is she being this way? And I'm not about to think at that point in my life that my stepmom would be causing these issues or making this more of a deal than it needed to be.
Yeah.
Like, just simple things as like not cleaning the bathrooms, or just I remember this was like a while after, but one year my brother was dating this girl and they were supposed to come out for Christmas, and it had snowed or been snowing a ton, and he didn't feel comfortable driving out there, and she called him multiple times and let him know that he ruined Christmas.
Oh, wow.
So just like things like that.
How was your dad at this point? Did he seem happy? Did you notice anything?
He seemed happy. They never really got into bad arguments. Little ones, I think, even their fights weren't crazy, especially for how confrontational she was. And so she knew my dad had bipolar disorder, and she knew about that from pretty early on in their relationship. And like when you date someone, when you marry someone, you also are dating their issues that they bring. And I don't feel that knowing what she knew, that she helped him in the way that she needed to help him. And, there's like a level of, he needs to be taken care of too, but she just, that wasn't who he needed her to be for him.
Right.
She egged him on more than was necessary, and
what do you mean by that?
So she was really bad about not dropping things. So like, hey, this happened, like, okay, I'm really sorry. And then instead of just, okay, we talked about it, we apologized, move on, it was continue to bring it up and up and up and up and up until he would just get really upset.
Was your dad being treated for bipolar at that point?
Yes. So you're fine. He was diagnosed, was he in his late teens? So he had been being treated for his bipolar disorder for quite a while. He was on medications for it. He was really good about taking his medicine. He would have times in his life where, like his medications weren't working like they should have been, and he would have to go get them adjusted accordingly. And I know that took time getting it right and getting everything where he needed it to be. But for the most, I know that my stepmom's family never knew that he was bipolar.
Yeah. Did he ever open up to you guys about it? Did he did he tell you kids what was going on and that he took medicine, or was this something you figured out later?
My older brother and I both knew. I knew from a pretty early age he had it, and he took medicine for it. But I know my two younger siblings didn't know.
And he told you?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't know if he felt the need to hide it, or I know that he did feel the need to hide it from my stepmom's family because they weren't very open-minded with that. And I think it's just more like of an ignorance towards what bipolar is, not necessarily, I don't know, let's leave it at that. I think it's just an ignorance. And
just people not being educated and knowing. And,
correct.
Yep, absolutely. So as you and your siblings got older, how are things when you did get older? Were they getting better? Were they getting worse?
I would say they were getting worse. So when my older brother moved out, things were good for a while. And I feel that towards the end of my senior year of high school, it's kind of when I started receiving the same treatment that my older brother did. I don't feel that I was able to make the decisions I wanted to make without her really intervening. I don't feel like I was able to be myself without her having her opinion known about it. I remember I at one point wanted to go into EMS, and she got in my face about it, pushed me, because she didn't feel she wanted me to go into nursing and not EMS. So just that kind of stuff. And then so I started dating this guy. He lived down the street from me, and I ended up getting pregnant. So I was 20, and my dad and my stepmom made it clear that I was not allowed to live there. So I moved in with my boyfriend, who's now my husband, and his parents. And after that, things were just really changed and weren't the same.
Did they give you a reason why you couldn't live there?
Well, they told me that I could live there with the baby, but that my boyfriend wasn't able to spend the night or anything like that, which is weird. What am I going to do? Get pregnant again or something? You know what I mean?
Oh, I know exactly what you mean.
This is already done. What's the worst that's going to happen? So so it wasn't as, they didn't directly say, hey, you can't live here, but they made it to where I'm not going to want to raise this kid on my own. That's not setting me up for success. So
right. Yep.
I moved in with my boyfriend's parents, and she definitely became a lot more manipulative, because she was able to say that I did things or said things without me being able to say, no, I didn't, or anything of the sort.
She was saying stuff to your dad?
Yeah. After my son was born, I would still see my dad and my stepmom, but we weren't close like we were, especially my dad and I were not close like we were anymore. It's almost like it really felt like she was kind of trying to push us away. Mm-hmm. One by one. And my little sister had moved in with my dad as well. And then when I moved out, she was still living there, and she ended up getting kicked out by my stepmom, and she came to live with me with my boyfriend's parents as well. And then my boyfriend and I moved out and got an apartment, and I ended up getting guardianship of my little sister, and she lived with us for 2 years until she went into the Air Force.
Is this a sister that's your best friend?
Yes.
Okay. And she's 2 years younger than you.
3.5 years.
3.5. Okay.
3.5 years, yes.
Yeah. During this time, whenever things were starting to get worse, was there any conversation with your dad of, I'm sorry that things are going the way that they're going? Was he aware? Was he in denial? Or was it just one of those unsaid things, and, you just kind of stopped talking to them, they stopped talking to you, you didn't see them as much? Or how did all that play out?
I want to say it was gradual. I don't remember exactly what was said or the events that occurred, but it got to the point to where I had to cut off my dad and my stepmom. It was just this psychological effects that it was having on me, of how she was treating me, and even, being an adult and moved out and I have my own family now, it didn't get better. And it was I guess easier for me, unfortunately, to not have that relationship with him. And my dad, I don't know how much he really knew. And I can go into detail with that a little bit more, because there was a conversation that my older brother and my dad had right before he passed away, that my brother kind of brought up that stuff to him, mm-hmm. of because of her, this is why we're in this position. She pushed us away, she did this. And it's almost like that was his aha moment, where he realized that, oh my gosh, this is really how this has been this entire time. And it's not the kids. And it's I don't think it's bipolar disorder had a lot to do with that. And he didn't want another failed marriage. Mm-hmm. He needed that stability in his life. We're all moving out and becoming our own people and adults and having our own families. And if it wasn't for her, I think he would have felt really alone. Mm-hmm. So I think that her continuing to be in his life, despite how he may have felt, was what he needed. If that makes sense.
Yep, it does make sense. Because anything's better than being alone, right?
Yeah. And mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't want to say that is how it is, but sometimes, people are like, well, I will choose this relationship over mm-hmm. what I think is worse, which is being alone, you mm-hmm. know?
I think that's 100% how he felt. And again, that his bipolar disorder played into that significantly.
Right.
There were times when I remember meeting my dad at an IHOP, because I wanted to try and fix things. And he agreed. And we were trying to work on things. So it was I felt better at first when I cut them out. But I have a really difficult time with knowing when to be done, I guess. And I wanted to fix things. And there was a level of, felt bad for my dad. I missed him. I wanted that relationship again. So maybe this time it will be better. Maybe this time it'll be better. And I remember meeting him at that IHOP and sitting down and having breakfast with him and talking to him, and then going over to his house and trying to work on things, but then it always ending up the same.
Yeah.
So it took me 2 or 3 times to finally be like, all right, I'm like, and my husband, like, this is too much for you. And this is really hard on you. And to where I got to where I was like, okay, I'm done.
How long, I guess, it was the time lapse of you cutting him out? I mean, did you ever have a relationship with him after that?
No, it was, for him, it was my stepmom and him together or nothing. I couldn't just have a relationship with him. I couldn't just go to dinner with him or see him. I had to make up with her as well. So that made it 100% impossible for us, my dad and I, to have any kind of relationship at all.
So then what happened after that?
It had been years since I spoke with him. So I have 4 kids. I was speaking with him when I was pregnant with my third daughter. Or sorry, my third child, my daughter. Gosh. And then she was born in 2014. So it was 4 years since I had spoken with him. And then one day, it was in April, I was driving to get coffee when my sister-in-law, my brother's wife, called me. And she let me know that my dad and my stepmom had gotten into a very big fight, and that my dad actually got physical with her. And she took herself to the hospital, and he had actually slit his wrists in an attempt to take his own life. But luckily the paramedics arrived in time, and his injuries were superficial and non-life-threatening. So, despite everything that my older brother went through, that I went through, what my sister went through, myself, my older brother, my younger brother, my little sister, we were all there at the hospital with my dad. And so he was admitted to the psych ward of the hospital. He had been off his medications. My stepmom's mom had recently passed away, and he had been helping my stepmom take care of her and her dad so he was like neglecting himself in order to help her family. And they got into an argument, and one thing led to another. And
so how long was your dad at the hospital, and what happened after he left, after he got better? Did he spend a significant amount of time there?
He was there for a week. Like I said before, he had been off his medications. So they wanted to try and get his medications regulated for his bipolar disorder. And they somewhat did, and then they released him. And he, at the time, was staying in a hotel. And the kids and I, it was almost like we were able to kind of like rebuild our relationship again. Like, as horrible as it all was, it was like I kind of felt like I had my dad back,
Yeah.
And like I said before, despite everything, we were all there. Like, I would go over to his house and help him with things. He would stay in a hotel instead of going back to the house, and the kids and I would go over there and like swim, and he would buy them snacks, and he randomly brought them donuts. Came over to the house and brought him donuts one morning, and he would call me and talk to me, kind of vent to me. We kept each other updated. We talked a couple times a week on the phone, would see each other pretty often, and it was really nice. Like, he gets to, be a grandpa to my 4 kids, and they get to know him, and I get to rebuild my relationship, and my siblings get to rebuild their relationships with him. And he had even been estranged from his siblings that live in the area, my dad's siblings, and they were all there to support him as well, so he was able to rebuild those relationships as well.
That's great.
It was great.
Were those relationships established again, over a couple months? Was it years?
With my dad and his siblings? Or
either? Both?
Okay, so my dad,
it just seems like it was really good at this point. He was getting a lot of support that he needed.
Yes. Oh yes. And that he didn't have before. And he and his younger sister were very close, and they weren't speaking because of my stepmom, and they were able to, he went and stayed with her a couple nights, and they were able to reconcile that relationship. And again, us too, like my older brother would have them over to his house, and they would do things together. So it seemed like, everything was good. He had just started a new job, which I know was really stressful for him, because it was a lot more intense than he thought it was going to be, a lot more demanding than he thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
And, he's getting up there. He was 63. So he's getting up there, almost 63. He was getting up there in age, closer, to retirement than anything. So him starting a new job on top of, he was also getting his house that he had been living in for 15 years. He was getting that ready to sell. So, and then you also factor in he and my stepmom situation that they're going through right now, on top of trying to get his medications regulated, starting his new job, getting the house ready to sell. Like I'd be a mess. So I can only imagine how he was feeling.
So were they together at this time? Were they taking things slow, trying to figure things out?
They weren't together. I don't know how she was viewing everything, but I know that he wanted to work on things. Like he acknowledged what happened, what he did, why he did it, and he wanted to try and work on things. And despite how she was being, and despite how even like her daughter was treating my dad, it's still like him not wanting to be alone. He wanted to work on things. He wanted this relationship to work, even if it wasn't healthy. But again, I don't know what her stance was on it. I don't know if I want to say it kind of like she was leading him on, but she wasn't being yes or no, which is what he really needed at that time.
Right. Yeah. If that was, one of his biggest fears was being alone, of course, I'm assuming would only want just a clear answer, to kind of put his head and his heart at ease, just to know where he's going next.
Right.
You said he was under, a lot of stress with everything happening, all kinds of stuff happening in his life. So then tell me about what happened after that. Thank you to BetterHelp for sponsoring this podcast. I was actually introduced to BetterHelp by my boyfriend because earlier this year I was in such a deep, dark depression and I didn't know what to do. I had to literally text him to tell him what was going on with me because I was so ashamed that I was sad and I didn't even want to ask for help, and texting was the easiest way that I could do that. And that night, we literally signed me up to do BetterHelp. That's just a little bit of my story, and I feel like if this can help somebody else with struggling of feeling alone and not asking for help, that's why I want to talk about their service. So BetterHelp is the leading provider of online counseling, which is exactly what I loved about them, is that it was online. And there's 4 ways that you can talk to your counselor. You can do a video session, there's phone calls, live chat, and messaging. And every counselor is licensed by their respective state and has over 3,000 hours of experience. BetterHelp is worldwide, so you can access them from any country, and there's counselors that will speak a wide variety of different languages. And you're going to be matched with a counselor within 24 hours or less. When being matched with your counselor, it's not a one-size-fits-all, so you do have the choices of picking the type of counselor. If you want a male or female counselor, if you want a counselor that's a little bit older, you are going to have options that fit your specific needs. You can message them anytime, day or night, and they get back to you in a timely fashion. What I also love is BetterHelp offers a broad expertise in their network, so it provides users with access to specialists that they might not be able to find locally. BetterHelp is not a crisis line, but it's a place where you can speak to a therapist if you are in need of help. The most important thing to me was the affordability, and that's exactly what BetterHelp is. They do make it affordable for people, especially in these times right now. And if you can't, they do have financial aid for those people that do qualify. So visit betterhelp.com/brightsideoflife. That's betterhelp.com/brightsideoflife. Join over 500,000 people taking charge of their mental health with the help of an experienced professional. And for your first month, you're going to receive 10% off by being a listener of The Bright Side of Life. So let them know that I sent you by using the link betterhelp.com/brightsideoflife. That's betterhelp.com/BRIGHT side of life. The link will also be in the description section of this episode.
April's when he went to the hospital. There about a week or so, got out, and between April and August, he started a new job, was getting the house ready to sell, and then in August, mid-August, he ended up losing his job because it just got to be too much. And he wasn't able to perform and do what the company needed him to do. And I remember the next day was my oldest 2, was their first day of school. And I sent him pictures and he responded and everything seemed, fine. He was really good about calling me and talking to me and telling me things that were going on. And like so I felt at the time, like if, something's going on, if he's having a hard time, he's going to tell me, because, these last few months, he's told me everything. He's called me when he's felt any certain way.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember this day. I've been raining all day. My two oldest, it was their second day of school, and it was a Wednesday. So I was giving my kids a bath, getting them ready for bed, and I was walking downstairs, and I noticed I had a missed call from my stepmom, which she and I, were barely communicating, only to talk about my dad or anything like that. It's like when we would talk, so it was really nothing. So that was weird. Like, she called me. So I called her back, and I could tell by her voice that something was wrong, and she had let me know that my dad killed himself. And I just remember just all of these little details. I wish I could forget, but I fell to the ground just sobbing. And my kids started crying hysterically because they had no idea what was going on. And they see me being upset like this. I called my husband, who was at work, tried to tell him what was going on, but he wasn't able to understand me. And that day, what I remember the most, and why just to this day, what I will have the most difficult time with, I think, is I had to call my siblings, all three of my siblings, and tell them. I called them one by one, and I remember every word, every sound, everything. That night, my husband drove out to my dad's house where he had taken his life, and my stepmom was there. We hugged and talked and came back home. And then the next few days, my sister flew in from Colorado. We not only had to process what happened, but had to plan his memorial service. And I just, it was the first few days were so hard. Of course I couldn't stop crying, and but it's almost like I wasn't able to process it at that time. So we were so busy planning his memorial service, and we had to go ID his body and just pick everything out. We went through pictures, and he really loved music, and we picked out all his songs that they were going to be playing at the service. This is difficult because we had to, interact with my stepmom. We all had to sit together, plan together, but it's for my dad. Again, it wasn't something I was able to process until everything is over.
And everything calmed down, and
everything calmed down. And I almost feel that that's when it got worse. It's my sister lived in Colorado. She flew back to Colorado. I saw my brothers here with me, but it's when you have to get back to your normal day-to-day and figure out this new life that you're now living. And you losing someone to suicide, a parent, is something that I wouldn't wish on anyone. It's just a pain unlike any other. And processing the death is difficult. And this is, for me, the first time I've ever had anybody really close to me pass away. So that, on top of the way that he passed away, is just a lot. And I don't know. I would go through text messages and reread them, and it was to the point where I was like, there's so many what ifs and questions. And he had left a note, but it was typed, and he had it on the fridge, and it wasn't directed specifically towards anybody. It actually didn't make a whole lot of sense. It was helpful and unhelpful. Helpful as in, it kind of let us know where his head was at that time. He wasn't obviously in his right state of mind, but it made me why it would have been nice to say goodbye. You know what I mean?
So
it would have been, go ahead.
With the letter, what questions did it answer for you?
So with his bipolar disorder, you have these manic episodes, and he would get you feel almost elated to where he's feels amazing, life is fantastic, life is great, wonderful. And then you go to the polar opposite of that, which is he is very depressed, feels horrible about himself, about life. He's not in the right state of mind. And with losing his job, getting the house ready to sell, trying to get himself back on track, it was just too much, mixed with the fact that he didn't have his medications regulated yet. It put him in this manic episode that made him not himself, and where he wasn't in a clear state of mind, which is why that note was helpful, because it didn't make sense. And it still to this day doesn't make sense at all. And it let us know, like, this is horrible and tragic and I can't believe this, but at least we know that, like, no, sounds kind of bad. Like, at least we know that he wasn't in his right state of mind. Like, he wasn't himself, and he wasn't almost out of didn't have control over his actions and his thoughts.
Right. I know what you're trying to say in that sense, because in a way it kind of did put your head or your mind at ease in a way, because it did let you know that no, he was not 100%, like you said, in his right mind, because if he would have been, and that letter would have made, I guess, all kinds of sense, then it maybe would have only almost left you with even more questions, you know, like,
right.
What? So I understand what you're saying there. Is there anything that you remember specifically in the letter that he said that sticks out to you to this day?
I have it somewhere. I should have brought it up.
It's okay if you don't. And I was almost scared to ask the question.
No, it's fine. It's just like, it was really strange. Just talking about a man isn't, I don't remember exactly the exact word. I don't want to butcher it. Or I know there was like a quote from, I want to say like Stalin, which is, I found it. So it was this one particular part in it. This quote is actually a quote from Joseph Stalin, and it was word for word, but it's almost like he didn't know who quotes Stalin. You know, I don't know, but death is a solution to all problems. No man, no problem.
Wow.
Which doesn't make any sense. And like, I seriously just dissected that note, and that's how I found out that this was a quote from Joseph Stalin, and trying to make sense and figure out where he was at and where his head was at this time. And like, maybe like my dad was really smart, and like, maybe he's means something by this, maybe he means something by this, and nothing ever came of it.
Right. Yeah, I'm sure it's something that can just drive you.
Oh yes, I could go down the rabbit hole with that one.
Yeah, that's like, well, I don't even want to make that comparison, but just whenever you read somebody's communication that is not from their mouth per se is really hard. It can be interpreted in so many different ways.
Right.
And so how long has it been since your dad passed away?
He passed away, it's been a little over 2 years. He passed away in August of 2018.
Okay. How has your life changed since he's been gone?
Oh, so my siblings and I were really close before my dad passed away. But since my dad passed away, we are so very close. I talk to my brothers on a weekly basis. We try and get together as often as we can. My older brother just got married, and I was actually the best woman in his wedding. And he and I we're like, we talked before, but not like we do now. And my little sister and I are annoyingly close and talk on the phone at least once a day. I'm not a religious person, but this has made me very spiritual. I try to be very mindful and practice mindfulness when I can, and not like almost like a Buddhist kind of way. Like, this is, I don't know, just trying to be in the present and not worry about the future, not worry about the past. And I've always been really empathetic, but like, I am so much more patient and empathetic with people. I try and go into everything knowing, like, I don't know this person's story. I don't know what this person's going through mentally or at home, and I try and carry that with me everywhere. I like to think that I'm a better mom because I try and be more empathetic and sympathetic to my children and what they're going through, and letting them know, like, hey, it's okay to feel this way or that way, and really trying to instill kindness in their words and actions and how they treat everyone, because it's a cycle, and it's just like, if I run into this like one person who's having a bad day and I'm not rude to them like that person before them was, and that just might, it's a butterfly effect.
Absolutely. Yep.
And whereas like before, I wasn't mindful of that as much. It was easy to get wrapped up in really little things that are so really unimportant now. I am always wanted to be a police officer for the longest time, but I was always afraid of like, if I fail or not gonna be good at it. So I never pursued it. It was always like, always that desire, but never anything that I would like, that I felt like a chase after. But
Yeah.
losing my dad the way I did, I gave me that little extra like push and drive that I needed to now pursue going into law enforcement and being able to be there for people that are either feeling the way that my dad felt or losing someone the way that I lost my dad. And like, I'm going to be able to do that. And if it wasn't for this, I don't know if I would have gotten to this point of where like, you know what, I do feel like I was kind of meant for this. And now with losing my dad the way I did, I'm definitely got that drive to go for it. Where again, I'm not gonna say no way I wouldn't have done it before, but having that motivation from wanting to again be there for those people is there because of this.
Yeah. Because now you have your own story.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, you have your own story, but you do. And with you having that now, I just know what you're saying. It just, now you do want to help people more than you ever have before, because you see that something terrible happened and it didn't have to happen. And if he was able to get help or ask for help or whatever you feel could have, saved his life, if you could be that for somebody else,
Mm-hmm.
that's what you want to do. And yeah, like you said, if that didn't happen, you wouldn't have found that motivation or the purpose. So I think after that, it's beautiful that that is what pushed you to pursue that.
Yeah.
Knowing what you know now and what happened to your dad, if you could talk to your dad before he did what he did, what would you say to him?
um, this whole thing, it's really easy to go over in your head of like, if I had done this or said this, then maybe things would have been different. I would let my dad know just how much I loved him and how much he mattered and how much we wanted him in our lives. But kind of like where he was at mentally, anything I did or said wouldn't have made a difference, wouldn't have mattered, which is, again, kind of like it's a bittersweet thing. I hate feeling like I wasn't enough, but I know in the end that this had nothing to do with my siblings or me. But I just, through all this, my one desire is to let him know that he's was so loved and wanted, and just like we just desire, like just still to this day desire to have him in our life and miss him a lot. I have dreams about him pretty often in which he's alive, but almost like he came back, but I have to keep it from him that he killed himself. Like I can't let him know. And it's a dream, but it's almost like if he knew what he did or what he had done and been in his right state of mind, like it would have really upset him.
Yeah.
Which again is a bittersweet thing because I know that wasn't him, but I also know that I feel like he wouldn't have done it had he been, in his where he needed to be mentally.
Right. So with that being said, if you could give advice to anybody that has lost a parent or a loved one to suicide, what advice would you give them to try to move on from it, to heal from it? I know that process is absolutely different for everybody. It could take years and years. But just getting through each day sometimes is a victory
Right.
after something so awful has happened. So what would your advice be?
So there's you'll hear people say, pain subsides with time, but I don't think that's the case. The pain is always there. It's never going to go away, but it changes over time. And it gets to a point to where, like it's the 5 stages of your grief process. which are 100% real. And you need to go through all of those feelings and like let them come as organically as possible, and let them like process and transition through them, and don't give yourself a timeline. Because I mean, it's been 2 years, but little things will still trigger my memory. And it's easier now because I have the tools to handle it, not because my pain is less, but because my pain's still there, but I now have the tools and the mental ability to handle it and to deal with it in a way that is helpful or positive, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So when you talk about tools, how did you get these tools? Did you seek any kind of help? Did you educate yourself on what happens in the grieving process?
I have not been to therapy yet. A lot of this is through support groups and books, and just finding my own way with even practicing my mindfulness, and knowing that there's other people who have done this before me that are okay, and that it's again, like losing someone to suicide is unfortunately a large group of people, but like knowing there's people out there that have been through this, and being able to be there for someone. If this episode of this podcast helps one person, then oh my gosh, that's amazing.
Yeah. No, go ahead. Sorry.
No, you're fine. Go ahead. I'm kind of all over the place with my answer anyway, so go ahead.
Oh, you're fine. I just, I think I'm amazed at how quickly, I don't even want to say how quickly you've gotten over this. I want to say that I admire you for how quickly that you've educated yourself on the grieving process. I lost my mom 10 years ago, and my stepdad offered for me to go to a support group. And I didn't. I didn't think that people could help me. I didn't think that there was anybody that knew the exact pain that I was going through. And if I knew now what I know now, and seeking professional help or even support groups, I would have taken them up on the offer so much quicker. I mean, my dad is a recovering alcoholic. He's been going to quote unquote support groups for the last 20 years of his sobriety. So if there was anybody that knew better of when you're sick, or when you're sad, or when something is going on, you need to be around people, and you need to go talk to other people that are going through this. And so it took me 10 years to even go and get help. So I'm just like amazed. It's only been 2 years since your dad's been gone, and you know already about the grieving process and how there is one, and you believe like, yes, you're going to go through every step, because I think for a long time I've still been in the step of denial. And like you said, it is different timing for everybody, and it can take people a lot longer. But I just want to add that is awesome that you took action that quickly, because it's not always the same for people.
Thank you. There's, it's the strength in numbers. And even if it's something as horrible as losing your parent, that, and like, I know like for me, there's been support groups locally and even through social media that have been really helpful.
Well, I would definitely like to get a list of those, after the show, if you want to send those over to me, because if anybody, is local and they have maybe went through something like this and want to, get a support group and go and talk to people, that would be really awesome. What would you say for people that might not know if they're in the grieving process, might not know even how to start, or not to really like put any orders on it?
So I'm a little over the 2-year mark, and like to some people it might look like I'm at a good point, or I'm past the point of crying with little reminders that I get, or if I still think about my dad every day, but it doesn't trigger the emotion that it used to. So to some people, they might look at me and be like, she's not in a grieving process anymore, and so one of the stages of grief is acceptance. and I'm still in that stage.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no particular order that you need to go through with any of these. There's no right or wrong amount of time that you need to be in each of these stages. It's completely normal to be in one stage, say anger, and then go into denial, and then go back into anger. And there's no rhyme or reason. There's a reason that there's no book out there on the perfect way to grieve, because there is no perfect way to grieve. There's no length of time that you need to give yourself or that anyone should give you, because it's your grief, it's your loss, and you're going to deal with it differently than I have. Or even like in my situation, my siblings have dealt with this differently than I have, even though we lost the same person.
Yeah.
But my mental setup and situations can be different than my brothers or my sisters, and it's not a one size fits all.
Absolutely. And I think that is, you're so right, because obviously I talked to you about, my grieving process, and I don't even know like if I mentioned like the denial phase and like how long I was stuck in it and everything like that. I do think to add with that is maybe I can't stress enough is just like even educating yourself. Like if I would have even tried to listen to my stepdad maybe about like what it was, like even what the steps are, because I'm scared sometimes people are like, I feel angry. I shouldn't feel angry. Should I feel angry? And then they have this guilt about them that they feel angry for something, and maybe not knowing all along that that is in fact a part of the grieving process. And if they knew that and they're like, oh, so this was going to happen anyway, whether I liked it or not, and just educating yourself, because man, I don't even know if I know all the steps to the grieving process. I should probably look. And you are right. I think that is so true, that there isn't necessarily a timeline, and everybody is going to go about it in a completely different way. And it could be quick for some and years for others. So I think that is absolutely true. I think basically, the last question that I have for you, I know we've kind of touched a little bit on it, but through all of this pain, you even told me you are still able to find the bright side of life. Just in your own words, now, what does the bright side of life mean to you?
The bright side of life through all of this is taking this loss and this pain, and instead of it drives me. But like I said, I've dealt with all my feelings and my stages of grief, and I don't let it come out as anger. I acknowledge them. I say, like, this is how I'm feeling, this is here, and I use that as like for good. And I try and be just extra kind to people and give people more patience than maybe they deserve, more understanding than they deserve. I'm so much more, like, so open-minded and really try and be non-judgmental. I'm more patient than I ever imagined I could be. If I'm driving down the road and there's someone really slow in front of me, yes, this is frustrating, but like, oh my gosh, I'm in an air-conditioned car with my favorite music on, just driving home from Target,
right?
And I'm not gonna be, what a waste of energy to be upset that person in front of me is driving slow. When it's just losing someone like this. Losing my dad to suicide has been I don't know, it's just mentally changed me to where I see the world so differently now. And the little things that used to bother me, like I am so much more mentally aware of myself now.
Yeah.
And try and just enjoy things and not take little things for granted, and appreciate what I have and who I have. And I really love people so much more than I did before. One, because having people in my life has helped with my grieving process. And again, the strength in numbers and knowing there's people out there that have been through what I've been through. And I'm like lost where I'm going with this.
I think I know what you're saying. I think the word, and I could be wrong, that you're looking for is gratitude.
Yeah.
It sounds like everything that you're saying. You just want to be more grateful for everything, not take the little moments for granted, being kinder than necessary, because you don't know when somebody is going through something. More patience, something
Yes.
I still have to work on.
I have my days. It's okay.
Yeah. But no, that absolutely sounds like gratitude. And once again, that's something also is very admirable about you. I think that's the word. I don't even know, because this early on of your dad's passing only 2 years ago, and for you to see and know what's best for you, and the best for you is to be grateful and to be mindful and to live in the present and don't live in the past. It's really great that you have come that far so quickly.
Thank you. It feels like I need to hear that from you, because it, of course, doesn't feel that way to me. It feels like it's, oh my gosh.
Right.
It's been a journey for sure.
Yeah. Well, I just want to thank you again, Megan, for coming on here and sharing your story and taking the courage to do that. So that definitely
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Bright Side of Life. I know Megan's story is not an easy story to share, but it's so important so her father will never be forgotten. I want to remind anyone that may be struggling or having thoughts of suicide, you can always call the National Suicide Prevention Hotline at 1-800-273-8255. They are open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The phone number will also be listed in the description of this podcast. And thank you to each and every one of you for the continued support. If you do like this episode or any of the other episodes, please feel free to leave a review on Apple Podcast. Lastly, if you know someone that may need to hear this story, please share it with them. We never know if this is the one that puts hope back in their hearts.